So when you had a chance to change, you did, and you took the other pair, and it was sunny at times. It was plenty sunny, and you try to dry it out a little bit and put it against your body, and you know, and it would dry out over time. And you lived in foxholes, and now foxholes, as I said, you couldn't dig down into the ground. The ground was frozen.
Right.
So you banked the snow around to create, you know, a buffer, and then you took cedar branches and put them down in the bottom of at the bottom to absorb the moisture, because two soldiers would be in a foxhole most of the time for body heat, you know, to try to keep yourself warm.
Right. You know, hang on. If you just tuned in, this is the Americhicks World War II project. Molly and Kim, and we're in studio with Lou Zoghby. We are talking about the Battle of the Bulge. We are in a foxhole, and it is really, really cold. We're going to go to break. After a word from our sponsors, we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Americhicks World War II project with Molly and Kim. We're excited. We're in studio with you today with Lou Zoghby. He is an Army veteran. He was in World War II. He was in the 194th Glider Regiment of the F Company of the 17th Airborne Division. And Lou, forgive me, it's hard for me to get all that out. I'm sure if I had served in the Battle of the Bulge, I would be able to rattle that off pretty easily.
Right.
But I am so grateful for what you did for Americans and for all of our friends in France. Kim and I went to Normandy for D-Day last year, 2016, with 4 D-Day vets. And so, Lou, as you can imagine, just hearing the stories and standing on the beach, we came back changed people. And we said, we've got to get as many of your stories as possible.
Right. One of the things that people forget is that women were on that beach, Omaha Beach or whatever other beaches. They were the nurses.
Yes.
The nurses and doctors had to go in with the soldiers as they got hurt. They had to be treated.
Yes.
So, and the one lady that I knew recently died that was there. She was pinned down about 3 days on that beach.
What was her name?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. When you think of it, let us
know. I didn't know her personally.
That's okay. We have interviewed on our show Layla Morrison. Layla
Morrison.
Yeah,
Yes,
Morrison.
She was in 30
her.
days after. But we did interview the daughter of Claudia Draper, who she was, I think, the commander of the nurses when they first went on to Normandy. But I still kind of thought it was a few days later. I hadn't actually realized that they had to come in pretty darn quick as well.
Yeah, boy, they were very important because, you know, as things happened, they had to be right there.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right, yeah. Well, let's get back to the Battle of the Bulge, Lou, and what you were doing. So you're advancing forward, and you went across the stream. Many people got their socks wet. Some people got gangrene and got to leave. The rest after that, they said nobody else can leave, and you dealt with it. You couldn't really dig foxholes because the ground was so cold and frozen, so you put snow banks. You created your own. You put branches on the floor to absorb the snow. Go from there.
Well, yeah, okay. So a few days later, our charge was to recapture the Belgian town of Flamierge, and that is about, as I calculated, about 18 miles just west of Bastogne. So as we went there, we went past Bastogne. We relieved some of the regiments of the 101st Airborne. As you know, the 101st Airborne was in Bastogne. Mm-hmm. And that famous story about the German general sending the note to General McAuliffe.
Right. Yes.
And he said they wanted him to surrender. And he looked at the note and he said, "Nuts." and he said to his aide, "What should I answer them?" And the aide said, "You just said it, nuts." He sent it back.
Well, the 101st Airborne, I mean, they were pretty pinned down at that time, weren't they?
They were what?
They were pretty pinned down.
No, they were dead. They were completely surrounded, and that's why the German general, sent them that note to surrender, which they didn't. And of course, as the other American divisions came through, of course, we pushed the German divisions back, so he didn't have to surrender. See.
Now, Lou, we understand that you came in on gliders.
Well, that's another story at the end of this story.
Okay. Let's keep going with this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as I said, our charge, 17th Airborne, was to recapture this town of Flamieres, which is a little farm town. However, like all little farm towns in the country, you have to cross a ridge to go down into the valley where the town is. And crossing that ridge, it took us 3 days to recapture that town because they knew we were coming and they had total visibility of us. And of course the machine guns and the mortar shells and the artillery shells. So we had to cross that ridge and go down a hedgerow into that town to recapture it. And we had 1,000 casualties a day.
Wow.
That's a lot.
And how many people would you're saying 1,000 casualties a day? How many men did you have?
An airborne division is 9,000.
Okay.
Roughly. It's less than an infantry division for whatever reasons. At any rate, it was called, the fellow that wrote the story after called it Dead Man's Ridge.
Oh my
See,
gosh.
because of that. And for that action that we did, we all received the Bronze Star. So that's nice.
Gosh.
It wasn't an individual effort, it was a total effort. But because it took 3 days and the casualties that resulted, they gave us all a Bronze Star.
Wow. Yeah.
Then after that, I had a little assignment. My platoon leader gave me the assignment before we went into that battle that if there was any particular action, that I should write it up so that we could send it back for home morale and give out Bronze Stars and Silver Stars. So after that 3-day event, with things quieted down, he says, "Well, you got a story?" Well, I didn't see any particular story. However, I said, these were two fellows that I knew, they were friends. I said, "Hawley and Bill knocked out that tank in the center of town. Write it up," he says. So I wrote, what did I know about it? I just wrote a matter of fact. It goes to division, and then it was bounced back with a format that you have to say, "Without regard to personal safety and under enemy fire," like a John Wayne thing. So at any rate, they got the Bronze Star. They got another Bronze Star.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Good friends. And then.
Well, we're talking with Lou Zoghby, World War II Battle of the Bulge veteran. So continue on, Lou.
Well, anyway, just to continue toward the end, we moved on. There were some quiet days. Now, the German army in front of us was only about 1,500 feet in front of us. They just, they would just keep pushing forward. You could hear them mess kits and,
Wow.
So one day, my platoon leader says, we've lost contact with division. Now, in those days, radio was hardwired, see?
Mm-hmm.
And there were openings between clumps of trees. He says, "Find out, see if you can fix it." So you pick up the wire at the phone and you trace it. And sure, it went out into the middle of the snow. By that point, there must have been 15, 18 inches of snow. And there was a mortar shell or an artillery shell had broken the wire. And it was because it was on top of the snow, I could find it. Well, I found those 2 pieces of wire. Now I got to splice them. They're small wires. And I had my gloves between my knees, had my trench knife, which we carried on our leg. And I'm trying to skin one wire when I hear mortar shell. A mortar shell was very distinctive. It kind of whistled like, the sound got
Getting
closer. It exploded to my right.
Oof.
Then I got the second wire. Another one was to my rear. Well, that's war, you know, okay. But however, when the third one went over on this side, being a slow learner, it dawned on me
They were trying to get you.
that they were calibrating their mortar using me as it.
Oh.
And so I dropped everything and dove into the first foxhole. I saw two guys were eating K-rashes. And they said, "What's all the noise?" I said, "The F Germans are zeroing on me." "Well, get the F out of here."
Yeah. Well,
We don't want you with us.
yeah.
Anyway, I got the wires done. Another day, quiet again. There were periods of quiet. And this goes on in all wars, I think. However, we're standing around, 5 of us, our lieutenant, sergeant, and a couple other guys, and me. And all of a sudden, a burst of mortar shells in the trees. Well, shrapnel comes down. The lieutenant got killed. Another fellow lost his arm. 2 others got more shrapnel. I had a small cut on the back of my right hand. When everything calmed down, the medic says, "I'll put you in for Purple Heart." I said, being naive at the time, I said, "Those guys get the Purple Heart. This doesn't require." She said, "There's no distinction between injuries." So I said, "No, let it go, Art." However, I didn't know that at the end of the war, that Purple Heart was worth 5 points, and I was missing 2 points from going home.
Okay.
Anyway, we went on, traveled by foot, truck, and actually rode on tanks, which was a scary kind of ride, because the road traveled along the edge of the forest, and there's snipers in the forest, and there's 5 or 6 fellas on each side of the tank, like ducks, you know. Well, I was always on the opposite side, and the fellas that were on the wood side, the tree side, some of them got hit and killed or injured, you know. I consider myself the luckiest guy in World War II for having survived many possible injuries and so on.
Yeah.
So
With as many battles as you were in, Lou,
well, actually, the main battle, listen, the Battle of the Bulge actually ended on January 25th. And just for statistics, it's considered the biggest battle of World War II. Why? Because the German army was 500,000, 500,000. We had 600,000. So there was over 1 million involved in the Battle of the Bulge.
Wow.
And the American Army had 81,000 casualties.
Wow.
And about 23,000 plus were captured, and 19,000 were killed. That's in round figures.
Wow.
So, in that case, by January 25th, none of us had had a bath or anything. We were really crusty. So, and then, right about then, we were in Luxembourg, and they said you can have a shower. So it was unique in that they had trailer trucks with about 6 shower heads on each side, inside of the trucks. I don't know how many trucks, but it was all cold water because there was no way to do hot water. But we were happy just to get in there. And of course, they didn't tell us how long we would be in there. So we get in there, and you're all lathered up, and 3 minutes, they turn it off. Next.
It'd be nice if they
soap in your eye, walking out.
Yeah, the funny part was that you got out of that shower and walked into this little building, and the supply sergeant would throw a set of long johns at you. Of course, you not regards any size, so you looked around. If yours was short, the guy was long, you swapped.
No trade, yeah.
A couple of others. I don't know how much time we have. But,
keep going.
one night we were in a small barn. The barn had a cow, one pig, and a bunch of chickens. And about 8 or 10 of us were trying to get some sleep in the straw. and the cow was bellowing, because it hadn't been milked, see? However, so one fellow says, can't anybody shut that cow up? Well, there was a little farm boy from Iowa. He says, I can take care of that. We thought he's going to go over and slit that cow's throat, you know. But he went over and he put his hands alongside the rib cage of the cow, found a certain spot, took his trench knife, and just plunged it in, pulled it out. And the gases were, see, when you don't milk a cow for a few days, it gets, you know, stomach aches.
Uh-huh.
And it calmed down. We got some sleep.
Wow. But it was still alive?
Oh, sure. That's a farm treatment, I think. It's when I told some farm boys here, some fellas, when we lived in Castle Rock. Anyway, they said, "Oh yeah, that's an old time cattle thing, you know. We know about that."
I thought you were going to say that he went over and milked it, and y'all
Yeah.
had milk
Yeah,
that.
And y'all had milkshakes for dinner.
There was no time to milk that cow. We had to get some sleep.
Okay.
One scary other event that most guys did not like, and that was called a midnight patrol, where 8 or 10 fellows had to go out about 11 o'clock at night when it was pitch dark and try to go into the German territory to determine if they're still there, how many might be there, what's going on, you know. And we're told if they sense that you're there, they throw flares into the sky, and you stop in whatever position you're in to look like a tree or a bush or whatever. Now, I was the last guy out of, I think, 8 of us. Now, we spread out about 3 feet apart in a row, and they had put mines on the ground as they retreated, the German army. Back then, the mines were different than the Afghanistan IEDs type mines. They were big, about 10 inches across and about 3 inches thick, with a ring around it, so that no matter where you touched that ring, it was going to explode. Well, when the first fellow felt the mine, he would whisper, "Mine, mine, mine," all the way back, so that you would shuffle, see? And as you shuffled and your foot hit that mine, you pause a minute.
Oh my gosh.
Well, the interesting thing was that they did sense we were there, and the flares went up. We all stopped, and they threw about 15 mortar shells at us, and not one went off.
Wow.
Isn't that luck?
That is
luck. And is this in the Battle of the Bulge?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
This is the Americhicks World War II project with Molly and Kim. We're on the phone. We're in studio right now with Lou Zoghby. We're talking about his time in the Army, in the 17th Airborne Division, in the Battle of the Bulge in the war. Stick with us. We're going to go to break. We'll be right back.